South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates on the continent, and in the world, the numbers are peaking at over 64% for the second quarter of 2021 for those aged 15 to 24 years old, and 42.9% for those aged 25 to 34 years. What are the barriers that are preventing the youth, including graduates, from being absorbed into the local jobs market? Here to talk to me about this, I'm joined by SEDA Acting Executive Manager Colin Leshau, EFF Central Command Team Member Yoli Soyaku, SMTAX Transia Business Accelerator CEO, that is Bondiwe Bejanziko, and Labour Analyst Mamokgethi Mlopiane, as well as the South African Youth Council NEC member Bongani Mahlangu. You're a part of this conversation tonight, as I mentioned, on WhatsApp 072-110-5584. We'd like to get your views live tonight, as well as your questions and comments. So send those through, and we will put you on, certainly, to get a sense of what is your take on these issues. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us here today on In Focus. I'd like to start with you, Mamokgethi. The Center for Development Enterprises recently saying in a statement that the current approach to jobs is not working and a new deal is long overdue. I think we are all pretty much familiar with the underlying causes, unless there is something particularly new. One, slow economic growth. Two, many are saying the labor market policies that discourage employers from hiring unskilled workers. On top of that, of course, we've got the big issue of a huge skills deficit, loosely put, critical skills that are in shortage. And would you agree with that statement that we need a different approach despite the endless summits, tender fairs, trade fairs, I beg your pardon, and the net leg negotiations? What are we missing?
Hi, good evening to your viewers at home. Absolutely. We are missing the fact that of the youth that have higher education and the youth that do not have higher education, across all different diverse backgrounds of the youth, somehow we are failing to connect them to work experience, but also we are unable to give them access to economic opportunities. And as such, many of them, qualified or not, with higher education background or not, find themselves locked outside economic activity, but also because historically and until today, the structure of the economy has always favored the work experience of, or the experience of those who have many years work experience. As such, when you're a young person, when you're a graduate without work experience, you often find it difficult to break it into the labor market, to break it into workplace. And it's not surprising, therefore, that we are a country that experiences or has statistically the highest youth unemployment globally, and equally so when you look at in the continent, in the sub-Saharan Africa, we continue to have the highest number across the region. And that is worrying because whatever policy mechanism and moves that has been put in place has not factored in the youth. By that I mean our policies are always responding to a crisis and not emerging or coming out with a solution of how are we putting the youth into into work, but also how are we giving them economic opportunities. And so it begins to be tiring to young people who are on street corners, who have qualifications, who have to peddle and struggle for food and employment, that we are constantly having these discussions and lekgotlas and netlegs and gatherings, and they are often locked outside, or even when they come in at these discussions, they come in as a, by the way, we need a youth representation, and policy really does not speak to them because our government has always adopted a neoliberal macroeconomic policy that really favors the market more than advancing socio-economic conditions of its people.
Colin, labor market policies need to change. That's what the private sector says. That's code for them to say, well, look, we agree that people need to get job experience. Like low-paying jobs are better than no jobs at all. But here's the thing. Companies want to be able to fire somebody after a probation period if they are not performing the way that they should. And our current labor market policies don't allow for that to happen. And therefore, this discourages us from even wanting to employ those people on a temporary basis.
Correct. And Thabo, I mean, I listened to when you spoke about the 64.4% unemployment rate, and that is really, it's very discouraging, and it's alarming. But I want to bring a different, angle to the topic in terms of just, so we're speaking about labor, we're speaking about young people finding employment, but we also need to have in the very same discussion the notion of, is there enough jobs to really, cater for young people coming out of universities? And perhaps the conversation that we then should start having is, what about entrepreneurship in schools? How are we going to make sure that through entrepreneurship and young people starting their own businesses, they are able to meaningfully contribute to the economy of our country? I mean, we speak about, and let's be real, especially black people, our people are still not emancipated when it comes to economic, freedom. And how are we going to get there? It's not going to be with jobs, because we've seen that the job market doesn't really give us the jobs that we want. Therefore, it becomes then important that we should look at alternatives such as entrepreneurship. And, with CEDA, we've got an entrepreneurship in schools program that we currently have. And it really is there to, assist and also direct young people to start looking at entrepreneurship differently. I think also when we look at universities, specifically, institutions of higher learning, where we look at universities and TVET colleges, we have what we call centers for entrepreneurship and rapid incubation. And through those centers, we then foster entrepreneurship where young people can go and they, with an idea, can go and speak to someone that would be able to assist them, because we do not want them to go and just seek employment, but we want them to become, business owners, and they would be able to assist us with a crisis of employment in the country. The National Development Plan 2030 speaks about 11 million jobs that should be created by 2030. We are not close to that. Yeah. So I would suggest that let's look at alternatives as well. And entrepreneurship would be one of those alternatives.
President Cyril Ramaphosa, on the build-up to these local government elections, while talking in various places, saying, well, 3.4 million jobs in 10 years is the target if the economy grows at 3%. Bongani, is that realistic? Do you believe that that would even be attainable?
No, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. So I don't believe it will be attainable. First of all, let's look at the last 2 quarters, economic quarters. We've seen jobless growth. We've seen inadequate investment when it comes to gross capital formation, which basically means that no one is coming into the country and investing in things that need to be invested in. We have seen in the JSE there's been delisting, which is divestment. So companies that are already in the country are pulling out. We have seen the same government unable to implement its own policies. For one, we are talking about the economic reconstruction and recovery plan hardly being implemented. There's a section in the plan that speaks about passenger rail. If you move around South Africa now, it doesn't even exist anymore. It has been stripped. So what the plan speaks about refurbishment, it should actually be construction from ground up. So that's a brownfield project. We speak about also poor economic planning. That when a person leaves an institution, be it high school, be it tertiary, where do they go? Government spends about R500,000 to produce one graduate. What happens to them after university or after TVET and so forth? Looking at just those few points, it becomes impractical for government to be able to perform at that level and for us to be able to even achieve those things. And also, I just wanted to add, like we speak about rigid labor policies that make it difficult for people to access the labor market. We also speak about experience. But if you look into the Employment Equity Plan, Section 20, subsection 2, 3, 4, 5, and probably 6, where it talks about having certain attributes to be suitably qualified to get a job. And one of those attributes is experience. And the Act says that if a person demonstrates that they can generate that experience within a reasonable amount of time, give them an opportunity. But it doesn't happen in South Africa. And why doesn't it happen? Because there's no enforcement of these acts. There's no enforcement of these policies, because the people in power are unable to implement state policies. So we have people that are sitting in offices there who are not fit for purpose. Another thing that we have seen, we see the private sector executives that go out into public spaces such as these ones and speak about South African youth not having skills, but they themselves don't even have qualifications. They were given an opportunity, and that's why they're executives today. And they can claim that they have years of experience, but you are given an opportunity. The same government
So
officials
how do we break that impasse? Because this is what we are busy going around in circles on and never actually dealing with the challenges that we need to be dealing with.
You see, that one becomes a very simple question, and why I say that we have seen on November 1st what happens when you keep on going in that same direction, that trajectory, that trend, that young people just don't go out, and it delegitimizes even the electoral process or the democratic process of elections, because a lot of people just choose to stay at home because they believe that the current existing systems and mechanisms do not take them into heart when things happen. So, I mean, there's even literature on youth governance, and I think Ukhet even spoke about it earlier, that youth are not even involved in decision making. They're not even made decision makers themselves. So in South Africa, there's no adequate youth governance or youth in governance, and there's extensive literature in that. So if government continues to behave in the manner that they do, and we will see in 2.5 years from now, when in 2024, when we go for elections again, if the private sector continues to behave in the manner that they behave, we will see what we have seen in July of 2021 repeating itself.
Entrepreneurship and youth governance, two suggestions put on the table so far. We'll hear some more when we continue next. What are your views? 072-110-5584. Tweet us at Newzroom 405. Info
that we must urgently finalize a social compact between the social partners to achieve our country's fundamental social transformation, to reduce and eradicate the plague of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. That, in truth, is where the resources will come from. If this is done, what is said in this particular sentence, if it is done as it has to be done, then we will generate the resources that are needed in order to deal with these problems, which are very legitimately raised in the localities, in the local municipalities. Since I was reading about water, about roads, and so on. So I'm saying, therefore, that the reason this manifesto contains that sentence is a commitment. It's a commitment by the ANC to say, at last we must move on this matter.
Of course, that was the build-up to the local government elections, and we're asking the question, are you expecting anything to change based on which party comes into power? Bongiwe, what the former president is saying there is that without a social compact between government and a private sector business, there will be no jobs that will be delivered. Pretty much what Bongani is saying as well. If government doesn't play ball, if the private sector keeps on digging its head in the sand, well, young people will not be showing up at the polls, but not only that, even worse, the unrest we saw in July is another possibility. How do we get to the social compact?
I think let's just compare what's happening in South Africa with our brothers in North Africa. 10 years ago, the young people of Tunisia put Tunisia at a standstill. And their youth unemployment rate at the time, where they were burning down Tunisia literally, similar to what we experienced in South Africa, their youth unemployment rate was only 23%. We are 3 times that at this point in time. So we cannot be surprised when we do see the youth of this country acting in a manner that's saying enough is enough. We also cannot have a conversation about youth unemployment without speaking about the fact that if, let's pretend, the South African population was made out of 10 people, 4 out of 10 people would be young people that are not in employment, not in education, and not in training. And so that means that they are economically inactive. So I do agree that you need several players and several things to work together, the government, the private sector, but also South Africa needs to realize that youth are at the forefront of the population. We've got a youth bulge, and this is not unique to South Africa, in Africa as well. Majority of our population is youth. If you look at the African Union's Agenda 2063, there ought to be a chapter there speaking about the Africa we want, written by youth. So in essence, what I'm trying to tell you is that if youth aren't sitting at the decision table, if youth's feelings and needs aren't recognized by this country, we're still going to see more acting out from the young people saying enough is enough. I want to, though, add on to what Colin was saying. Because I'm active in the entrepreneurship ecosystem of South Africa, I am a fan of entrepreneurship being introduced in the education system of South Africa. But over and above that, what I see on a daily basis in the business accelerator is youth going into entrepreneurship not necessarily by choice, but because of the rates that I've just shared with you. The fact that there's actually no job to absorb me. Two, I've got less than matric and I'm unskilled for the jobs that are being advertised. And last but not least, there are child-headed homes and women or single-parent homes where people need to be fed. So you end up running a business. But what we then do is we register on CIPC and don't have sustainable businesses. So I think we need entrepreneurship education, but we also need business accelerators, so development finance institutions playing their part to finance SMMEs.
All right, Yolisa, it's only through a social compact that houses, roads, and jobs will be created. What's the position of the economic freedom fighters? Please unmute.
Thank you very much, Thabo. Greetings to you and greetings to your viewers. I think the biggest mistake that we made as a country when we came into democracy was to infantilize the youth, make them to be children that we would look at as adults, forgetting that it was the same youth in 1976 that actually was very instrumental into the revolt against the structure and the system that was there in the first place. And I think if we thought about that, the same youth that was there then is the same youth that is governing us now. And if we think about it that way, then we would know that the same youth that is there now is the same youth that will govern in the future. And it's not only going to govern ourselves, but it's going to govern our children and their children's children. And where we missed it is where the solutions lie. And I think we missed it where we prioritize education, early childhood development, where we didn't prioritize basic education, we didn't prioritize free, quality, higher education. And we didn't prioritize public health care. We didn't prioritize the justice and correctional services and the police system, which are very instrumental now, because what is happening is that there's a high cases of crime, high cases of gender-based violence because of the system that has been created now. And we may talk about youth unemployment, but what are the systematic issues that are coming out of that youth unemployment? What is happening in terms of housing? What is happening in terms of what are we doing as a country in terms of industrializing industries that have been there before? It's not like we would need to start from the beginning. There's been industries from the former Ciskei in the Eastern Cape to Northern Cape. There's mines, but there's no employment there. So what is the government in the moment doing to assist that? So we want to revitalize the industrialization of this country, not just rely on private sector coming in, but actually as a country, as a state, how much capacity do we have?
Yeah.
What are we doing about rural development? Because majority of the youth is in the rural areas.
Yeah.
They're sitting there with no hope, no nothing. We don't have even a fourth industrial revolution that is actually functioning even at the moment.
Yeah.
And we talk about youth structures that are happening now. So we need to be open to say we need to change the status quo now.
Right.
And we would have liked that to happen from the 1st of November with the youth participating fully in the voting structure of the country.
Yeah.
That is the one way that we can actually make a change as the youth, but also there's other ways. But for the youth to participate, it needs to fight now differently from the youth of 1976, and needs to fight via the electorate, fight via the legislative arm of government, because these people have no succession plan whatsoever.
Talking of the capacity of the state, listen to what the finance minister had to say in terms of allocation in this mini budget towards employment.
A key concern of government is the huge unemployment challenge we face as a country. South Africa continues to grapple with the long-run unemployment, and in the current conditions, unemployment is lagging the economic recovery. Government recognizes that we need more private sector jobs driven by a strong and growing investment climate. At the same time, the state must play a role in mitigating the impact of this crisis. The 2022 budget will allocate almost 74 billion rand towards public employment programs over the MTF. In addition, further opportunities will be explored for supporting employment through other means.
Right, there you are, 74 billion rands. I mean, one would say that's a substantial amount of money. But is there evidence, Bongani, to support that the view that government-funded job schemes have a long-term positive effect?
Basically, even before we start there, okay, we can start there, for instance. Currently, we have the South African Youth Pathway Management Network, and the PYEI stems from that. If you look at that network in itself, it's part of that package, so it's not even a new thing. What it leads to gross youth underemployment, because that's where these youth go, they become underemployed. And if you want to go into entrepreneurship using that management network, it sends you to become a small enterprise, so you become really insignificant. You can't really even put bread on the table with whatever entrepreneurial activities that you will be engaged in. So what it basically does, it leads to skills misdirection. It takes those that should be in the capital-intensive sectors of your economy to the labor-intensive sectors of your economy at the expense of the taxpayer. So now why does that happen? Because government does not even know our youth, because it believes our youth are homogeneous, whereas our youth are heterogeneous. They have multiple interests, and even though the entrepreneurship and employment are broad pathways into the labor market or economic activity, but they are not the only, if you start analyzing deeper. So if you don't engage the youth, that 70-something billion will also be misused. Over and above that, why do we need 75 or 70-something odd more billions? When you look at our municipalities, our municipalities are currently experiencing gross infrastructure backlogs, and these are funded activities. The municipal infrastructure grant, there's money there. But you see at our municipalities, about 70% of infrastructure grants being sent back to the fiscus. Why? Because they do not have the necessary human capital to use that money. Yeah. Also, in the very same municipalities, there are budgeted positions that are not being filled. So if you look into government alone and you start employing people for the positions that currently exist, and there are skills in the economy for those positions, then that alone, without spending a further cent, would make a serious dent in the existing or that long-run unemployment that the minister is referring to. So it goes back again to poor economic planning and not really understanding the South African labor market and its dynamics.
I wanted to come into that. That would have been the next point. The question that is raised by the economic freedom fighters on their manifesto of insourcing town planners, engineers, artisans, general workers, gardeners, drivers, security guards, etc., etc. Will that deal sufficiently with unemployment, Mamuketi? Please unmute for us if you can.
Sorry, I apologize. In part, yes, because we, as the fellow panelists have said, we have young people who have qualifications, like Bongani has said, that are not necessarily employed, and we have vacancies within the public sector that needs to be filled. Yet for somehow, there's a gravitation toward consultants and outsourcing activities and services rather instead. Of course, we know why there is that in the public sector, beneficiation of those close to political leaders and tenders and so forth. But also we need to realize that, and I'm going to touch on the allocation that the Minister of Finance had made. South Africa has never really been, allocation has never really been such a big issue. It is where the money goes, where is it going to be spent. When you say you have 74 billion towards job creation. What do you mean by that? What do you mean when you're not being specific? And as Bongani has said, the challenges that the youth are facing are intersectional, gender, race, class, and so forth, rural, urban, peri-urban, peri-rural, and so forth. But also the youth are not all the youth want to be employed or entrepreneurs. By the way, because of implementation and policy and legislature that tends to block things, out of 10 business that starts, 4 will fail before the first year in South Africa. And that's telling about entrepreneurship. We saw the YES initiative that the government had taken, was leading, and it hasn't really yielded that much success. We saw 2010, by the way, to go back even further. 2010 was declared the year of the job when New Growth Path was introduced along with NDP and so forth. None of that had happened. Yeah. And so the challenge then for government is not just about in terms of allocation, where that money goes, how it is spent, who is it going to be spent on, in what ways is it going to be used, but also there seem to be this perception that if we say we put aside 74 billion, that should silence the youth and render them mute, because we had said here's 74 billion for job creation. But where we have seen through spending on COVID that the bulk of the stimulus that was meant to stimulate the economy has gone to medium to even large corporates instead of the young people or people that are meant to benefit for that. So about 45% of that had gone to that.
We've brought in a little bit more on the government job schemes and why they are failing. Many saying that these initiatives, they tend to be underused because, as Bongani say, they often fail to move young people from temporary forms of employment to more permanent opportunities. But Colin, I want you to respond to the failures of business and what that tells you about the entrepreneurship space and what needs to happen there, as you are pointing to entrepreneurship literally as the way to unlock us out of this. We'll continue, of course, the conversation tonight focusing on youth unemployment, big crisis, many promises made on the build-up to the local government elections. Are things likely to change depending on which party comes into power? Well, let's hear your views. 072-110-5584 or tweet us tonight at Newzroom405. We want to take you live. Still with us, Colin Leshao, Yuliswa Yaku, Bongiwe Bejansiko, Mamuketi Mlopiane, as well as Bongani Mahlangu in this conversation. Before the break, the issue of failure of businesses, Colin, being brought on to the table. Yes, you suggest that entrepreneurship could be an alternative to the question of employment, but do we put unnecessary barriers on the way to entrepreneurship that makes it difficult for businesses to succeed? For example, CEDA, you've got the Women Enterprise Program. I mean, if you just look at the criteria for qualifying for that, immediately it says to you business should have gone past the startup phase. A lot of people are being locked out of that. Or if you're saying there should be a million and not exceeding 5 million turnover per annum, immediately locking out a whole lot of young women out of accessing that particular program and that opportunity.
Yes, certainly, Thabo. So the World Bank, through the World Economic Forum, always speaks about, the ease of doing business. And I think red tape reduction in South Africa is something that we should really look at, specifically on how do we engage with entrepreneurs and small businesses within the country. I think from a CEDA perspective, what we have picked up is that a lot of times, barriers that's there on small businesses is things such as access to markets, access to finance, access to technology. And yes, you've mentioned something, but just in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and that, within entrepreneurship, there's basically different steps and a lot of the entrepreneurs that's within the space and that goes to CEDA, we normally take them on what we call a client journey. So you would find the startup that's at ideation phase. And for those type of entrepreneurs, we would have our incubation network. We've got 110 incubators throughout the country, and they basically look at entrepreneurs at that level. Yeah. Then we've got entrepreneurs that's really more advanced, and they are the ones such as the Women Entrepreneurship Coaching Program that you spoke about, but so many other. And we've got our branch network that would then look after these entrepreneurs, business advisors would assist them, and we wouldn't just assist them once and leave them. So that's why we call it a client journey, because we understand that after a first intervention, it might be that they need to come back for a second, a third, a fourth intervention. Yeah. But I agree with you. There's quite a lot of things that really makes it difficult for entrepreneurs. I mean, Bongwe spoke about, DFIs needing to really, come to the party and bring their part. We've seen it that entrepreneurs that once financing between, 5,000 and 250,000 rand, it is very, difficult for them to actually get that type of financing, just because the cost for that finance, as your DFIs and your commercial banks would say, it is too high. Yeah. We also saw that there was a 200 billion rand, credit guarantee scheme that was introduced by the National Treasury last year, and how commercial banks didn't really want to participate in that scheme. And that left a lot of SMMEs, with COVID hitting so hard, it left them there stranded, not knowing what to do after the money was made available. I think of the money, only about 70 billion rand of that money was spent, and that's under correction. Also, what has currently happened, and I think a lot of young people must know this, that the National Treasury, through the Jobs Fund, as well as the National Youth Development Agency, just, announced 2 new programs for funding within the National Youth Development Agency. And those programs were launched just a couple of weeks ago. So it's fresh, it's there. Young people can definitely, apply for it. From a CEDA perspective, we've seen a lot of our programs coming on board and assisting some of these entrepreneurs wherever they are at. I think another thing for me that's very vital and it's important to speak about, and I think Yuliswa spoke about it, the fact that we don't really see technology within, the rural areas and townships, but we have started looking at digital hubs within the townships, within rural areas where these entrepreneurs can then go to and they can then get assistance from those digital hubs. What we've also seen is that the services are not as easily available within townships and rural areas as what it is in urban areas. And that's another thing that CEDA is currently, working on, because we understand that that's where the majority of our entrepreneurs is staying, and therefore we need to make sure that we cater for them as well. But access to finance, access to markets, 2 of our biggest issues in terms of what is actually keeping entrepreneurs from moving forward.
Bongwe, as Colin says, there's access to markets, access to finance. How you're in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, how do you assist a young person who has 5 mouths to feed? He's probably even at ideation phase of the business. And so what makes that business to fail is that he's got to still eat out of that business while still investing in the business for it to grow.
And I think this is exactly it. That's the gap that exists on the ground. So what that young person that you've just described to me, Thabo, will end up registering on CIPC, their company, for 175 Rand and literally be stuck thereafter on what do I do. They rejoice at the fact that I've got a registered entity but don't know how to move forward, which is why I think business accelerators like ourselves at SNTAX Business Accelerator, we work with people like CEDA, we work with NYDA. We are actually an ecosystem partner with CEDA and are very vital in things like the Township and Rural Entrepreneurship Program, because one entity alone is not going to get to the root ground or root cause of what's happening in entrepreneurship. So when it comes to access to finance and access to markets, you need de-risking measures. And so how you help a young person is, one, educate them about the tax and compliance aspect of business, so that when they start up, they're literally starting on the ground, where when programs like these are announced, they are able to comply firstly with the requirements that are there. Because as Bongani has mentioned, you can have however many billion, the 74 billion set aside. If the requirements are such that the people can't get into it, then you're not gonna see youth unemployment move, nor are you gonna see even the effect that Colin and I want to see in terms of entrepreneurship absorbing those young people. So there's an education piece on compliance, holding their hand in tax, and also business advisory services. So how you accelerate a business is to take them from ideation and think about sustainable ways of having entrepreneurship entrepreneurs in South Africa address the issues that we see on the ground. Yoliswa hinted to this earlier, where she said, as well as Bongani, in fact, that you need to actually engage the youth. There are industries that the youth are spearheading that we haven't even thought of. We can think about the creative industry. You know, there's arts, there's culture, and there's digitization, even in the rural areas, those that are having access to a simple smartphone. You'll be amazed at the business ideas that they do have. And so you need business accelerators like SMTech's Transire Business Accelerator. You need the seeders, you need government, and you need the private sector to help these entrepreneurs build sustainable businesses. Yeah. Gone are the days where we register businesses on CIPC and there's no mentorship, there's no coaching, and there's no education on compliance, tax, and business advisory.
So Wayne, I wanted you to come in on this issue of government insourcing and abolishing of tenders as a way of dealing with unemployment. And how much of a dent will that really make?
You know, it would make a big difference. I think what we have, the idea that South Africa has about its government is that it is incapable of using its power internally to do the work. That means that we negate the fact that we have capable people. That means that we believe that we don't have enough educated people, enough skills in the country, enough capacity to give the state what it needs to. And that's why we fed into the private sector so much. And that's why we're not building. And I think if we start building now, and this is why the issue the EFF has is that this government is very apathetic. It's not forward thinking. It does not have a succession plan for what will happen 100 years from now. Because our children that we have now, irrespective of whether we are making money, they are going to have to live in the South Africa that we've built now. And if we don't invest in that South Africa, we are going to find ourselves in a problem. And if we don't have leadership that believes in the capacity of the state to do the work it's supposed to do, because the state is supposed to provide quality education. It is supposed to provide quality healthcare. It is the role of the state to provide social welfare for its people. That is what the government is meant to do. It is supposed to. If we had done all those steps and we had gone through all those steps, we would have a youth right now that is participating fully in the building of the country right now. A very patriotic youth that is voting. We are sitting with voters who did not go and vote on the 1st of November because even the youth is feeling apathetic. There's no will because of the government.
I'll come back to that in a moment when we come back from the break. In a conversation with, for example, Kokda MEC in Limpopo, saying, what's up with the job vacancies, right? Why are you not filling those posts? He says, for example, in rural areas, they will struggle to get people who will take up those jobs with the necessary qualifications because those people move, for example, to urban settings. And so municipalities in rural South Africa would end up suffering because of a lack of those skills. For example, competent engineers, town planners, and artisans, and so on and so forth. But I'll hear you, I'll get you to weigh in on that when we come back, plus a question for Colin as well around issues of access in rural parts of South Africa to all these programs. Do stay with us. Let's get your views tonight. 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us at Newzroom405. Back with you tonight on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. Of course, the crisis of youth unemployment under discussion tonight with lots of views and ideas being put on the table around issues that need to be addressed in order to change our approach to the question of job creation in the country, with an estimated 3.4 million jobs by President Cyril Ramaphosa in the next 10 years. How do we even begin to knock at that particular target that we've set for ourselves? So before the break, Bongani, I was talking about the failure to educate the population, right? The workforce is not educated, and the skills crisis is not being tackled adequately. Speaking to Kokja MEC in Limpopo about, for example, their vacancy rate, which is quite high. Why they're not filling up those posts, right? He says, well, the people that are supposed to be in those local municipalities to fill those posts, actually they move to urban areas, and so it becomes difficult to get those skills. And if we are to get them, then we would have to pay, because we must now encourage people to come from wherever they are to come and take these positions. And with the fraught state of our local government finances, it's just not affordable.
No, thanks. So that basically speaks about what I said earlier, that these high-ranking government officials, when they're given these public platforms, they just say things that are not even backed by any research. For first part of the answer is that we have the National Skills Development Plan, we have the Skills Development Act, the Skills Levies Act, the National Skills Fund. Is that being monitored accordingly? Is that being evaluated accordingly? Is it achieving its objectives? Are all these SETAs that exist and are funded by big money that comes from the private sector? Because you know that the private sector would give 1% of its total remuneration package. Is that being monitored, evaluated accordingly? Is it achieving its objectives? Is it skilling our young people? No, it's not. So does the Kokta MEC know about that? Probably not. Also, if he conducts his research, he would find out that most of the teachers in the primary schools, in high schools, actually have STEM qualifications. These young teachers have STEM qualifications. BSc students are struggling to enter the labor market to do what they would have studied. So that's why I spoke about underemployment earlier. So they resort to becoming teachers in the very same villages. Does he know that commerce students, those that have studied accounting, economics, and so forth, are also teachers in high schools, teaching LO in high school, that they are underemployed in the same villages? And those that can't be underemployed in the same villages, they are then forced to move to urban spaces, whereas that very same municipality of that village requires the very same skills, but this person has been applying at that municipality, but not being absorbed at that municipality. I even once challenged a high-ranking official in the Northwest. I said that give me a village and I will give you graduates that come from that village that are currently seated at home with that skill, unemployed, begging for underemployment. These young people that are being absorbed in the PYE project, go check the skills, do a skills audit of those young people. They have the necessary skills to run those municipalities efficiently at a very affordable rate. But government will not do that. And I think Ukhethi spoke about it earlier, the corruption in consultants. Consultants cost about 10 or so multi-billions of rands each year. Yeah. And if you look at the very same consultants and look who they are connected to, then you'll find your answers. So these high-ranking senior officials of government, they must not play like that. The next time they say they don't have skills or we don't have skills as a country, they must say, according to this research done, we don't have skills. Do they even know how many applied statistic graduates in masters graduated last year? They don't even know.
Got you. We press for time. Let's take Hilton quickly calling us on the line, 072-110-5584. Hilton, good evening, and thank you very much for getting in touch with us tonight here on In Focus. What's your comment? What's your question?
Well, thank you. I made a comment, and the newsroom felt that I just mention what I commented on the WhatsApp. And so I think it's, I was once a youth as well, and I started a business as, in the Township area. And over time I grew that into, matured throughout time. And so what I was saying is that, we need to embrace a hustle economy, right? A hustle to boss economy. Youth entrepreneurship in the context of Africa is not about immediately building wealth. Sustainable livelihoods and social elevation happens within an enabling environment. And so we need to embrace this hustle to boss economy. In fact, in Kenya, we've got a very nice model. And so from informal to informal businesses, there's a saying that says that a flower blooms with an environment where it grows, right? Where it can grow.
Yeah.
And so South Africa needs 1,000 small business development centers supporting both formal and informal businesses, and especially the youth, health, hustle, self-employment.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to hear, some of the colleagues comment about that informal, infrastructure when it comes to around, owning a business. There's entrepreneurship, and then there's owning a business. And I think when we talk about youth, we talk initially about owning a business, and even if it's just funding yourself, and later your siblings, and then contributing to the home, and later establishing your business, there's a journey towards of that organized chaos.
Hilton, appreciate your call. Thank you very much, and for weighing in tonight. Mamuketi, and that of course segues into the question that you also have around youth entrepreneurship in rural areas in particular. Hilton suggesting that we need, at least in the country, 1,000 small development centers, particularly to deal with the informal infrastructure, to almost take those young people by hand and walk them through this journey.
Hi, yes, thanks. I tend to have a challenge, and I'm very hesitant about the imagination. I call it the problematic imagination of entrepreneurship as a panacea to South Africa's unemployment challenge or work challenge or income generating challenge. And we tend to, it's almost embedded within the neoliberal approach to development or progress, which many African countries have followed, that moves from providing a service that is required, such as enabling people to be able to enter market, have work, or be able to generate some sort of income, to saying the onus, the burden of development is on you. You are responsible for your self-development. As such, entrepreneurship and business is a way to go. There's something shackling about we need to emancipate entrepreneurship from that, seeing it as a solution to youth or to unemployment in general as a whole. Because on average, in the South African context, in the SADC context, even in the African context, we have seen that our economy is not structured like developed economies. We have high informal economic activity that often is not regarded as part of the mainstream economy. And within that, the youth often struggle to find space, even outside, even in the informal economy. How much so about finding space in the formal economy? And we talk about access. We also run the risk when we talk about entrepreneurship and businesses in South Africa. And as I say, I hesitate to see it as a solution, because on average, a young person who has an idea about business in rural Northwest, I'm currently in Northwest, commute between both provinces, Joburg and Northwest. A youth in rural Northwest, in rural KZN, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, Northern Cape, Kuruman, Postmansberg, does not necessarily have access to the incubation that the seeders have, or access to the platforms and technology. How are they going to be able to access those funds? Cannot even have money to catch a bus, to go to town, to be able to download the documents that are needed for them to be able to be incubated and so forth. And we know that the structures that are meant to be supporting the incubation process across regions in provinces, for example, in the Northwest, they are either located in Mafikeng or Rustenburg. What about other areas in other parts of the province? And there lies in the challenge.
Let's leave it there. Colin, I'll have to bring you back in to come and answer the question of access at some point, but we're out of time for today. Yolisa, appreciate your time, as well as Bongani for coming through, as well as Bongiwe. Let's wrap it up with this tweet from Tsapang. Entrepreneurship is not an ideal mechanism to fight unemployment, especially if you are in the service business, when there's no economic activities that bring in revenue within our communities. Then entrepreneurship is doomed. Tsapang getting in touch there on Twitter.